Ethan Harris, a solitary truck driver, discovers a golden retriever, Maya, and her 3 puppies tied near train tracks during a snowy Wyoming night. Rescuing them sparks a journey that transforms his life. With the help of Claire, a local vet, Ethan uncovers the horrifying truth behind GeneSys Labs, a biotech company responsible for breeding and experimenting on animals, including Maya and her puppies. As they gather evidence, Ethan and Claire face relentless threats from GeneSys, risking everything to expose the cruelty. Their efforts, supported by investigative journalist Sarah Jenkins, lead to a viral expose that shuts down GeneSys Labs and saves countless animals. Ethan's newfound purpose blossoms into the Haven Rescue Center, a sanctuary for animals in need, where he finds connection, healing, and a new family. What did you think of Ethan's inspiring journey? Did Maya and her puppies capture your heart? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to DG Story to catch more powerful stories like this one. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Together, let's celebrate the triumph of compassion, courage, and second chances. See you in the next story. The Wyoming countryside lay silent under a thick blanket of snow. The wind howled, whipping through the barren fields, and the only sign of life was the occasional chirp of a bird or the distant rumble of a passing train. For Ethan Harris, the vast emptiness mirrored his life, a routine of long drives and lonely nights. Ethan's truck roared through the desolate highway, its headlights cutting through the swirling snowflakes. The heater blasted in the cab, but Ethan hardly noticed. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind elsewhere. This was supposed to be another ordinary delivery, just another paycheck to keep the bills paid. Suddenly, the glint of something ahead caught his attention. Ethan squinted, his brows furrowing as he slowed the truck. On the side of the road, near the tracks, was a strange shape, a golden blur partially buried in the snow. Ethan pulled over, the truck's tires crunching against the frozen ground. He stepped out, bracing himself against the biting wind. As he approached, the shape came into focus. A golden retriever lay in the snow, her body curled protectively around 3 tiny puppies. The sight made him freeze. The mother dog's eyes opened weakly as Ethan knelt beside her. Her ribs jutted out, her fur matted and damp from the snow. The puppies were trembling, their tiny bodies huddled together for warmth. The faint sound of an approaching train grew louder in the distance, adding urgency to the moment. Ethan's chest tightened. He glanced at the tracks and then at the mother dog. "What the hell happened to you?" he muttered, pulling off his gloves to check the situation more closely. His hands worked quickly to free the ropes that bound the mother dog to the base of the railroad crossing sign. Who would do something like this? The thought made anger flare in his chest. But there was no time to dwell on it. As he freed the last knot, the train whistle blared. Ethan gathered the trembling puppies in his arms and gestured to the mother dog. "Come on, girl. We gotta move." The dog staggered to her feet, her movements slow but determined, and followed Ethan as he ran back toward the truck. Just as he climbed into the cab and slammed the door shut, the train roared past, shaking the ground and leaving a trail of icy wind in its wake. Inside the truck, Ethan adjusted the heater, directing the warm air toward the shivering dogs. The mother dog, whom he decided to call Maya, rested her head on his lap, her eyes full of trust despite the ordeal she had endured. Ethan glanced down at the puppies nestled in the thick jacket he had wrapped around them. Their tiny paws twitched as they whimpered softly, the sound tugging at something deep inside him. He sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "What am I supposed to do with you guys?" An hour later, Ethan pulled into the parking lot of a small gas station on the edge of a sleepy Wyoming town. The flickering neon sign above read, "Claire's Pit Stop." Ethan stepped inside, the jingling bell announcing his arrival. Behind the counter stood Claire Walker, the station's owner and a part-time vet. Her sharp blue eyes lit up when she saw him. "Well, if it isn't Ethan Harris." Claire said with a teasing smile. "You're about the only one crazy enough to be out in this weather." "Yeah, well," Ethan replied, pulling his jacket tighter around him. "I found something crazier." He motioned toward the truck, and Claire's smile faded when she saw the dogs. She immediately grabbed her coat and followed him outside. In the station's small back room, Claire worked efficiently, examining Maya and the puppies while Ethan hovered nearby. "She's severely underweight," Claire said, her tone grim. "And these puppies, they're lucky you found them when you did. A few more hours out there, and they wouldn't have made it." Ethan watched as Claire gently cleaned the puppies and wrapped them in warm towels. Maya, now lying on a blanket, wagged her tail weakly. Despite her condition, there was a quiet strength in her eyes that Ethan couldn't ignore. "What kind of person ties a dog to a railroad crossing?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with anger. Claire shook her head. "Someone who doesn't see them as living beings, that's for sure." As she examined Maya more closely, her fingers brushed against something cold. "Wait, what's this?" Ethan leaned in as Claire held up a metal tag attached to Maya's collar. Engraved on it were the words, "GeneSys Labs." "That's weird," Claire muttered, frowning. "What's GeneSys Labs?" Ethan asked. "It's a biotech company," Claire replied. "They're known for working with animals, but there have been rumors. Things about unethical experiments and genetic testing." Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "You think she escaped from them?" Claire nodded slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe someone dumped her because she didn't meet their standards. I've heard of breeders doing things like that." Ethan's jaw tightened as he looked at Maya, now sleeping peacefully with her puppies. Whoever had done this to her wasn't just cruel, they were monsters. As the snowstorm raged outside, Ethan sat in the corner of the room, watching over Maya and her puppies. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of purpose, a sense that he was exactly where he needed to be. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear: he wasn't going to let Maya and her puppies become victims again. Ethan leaned against the wall of Claire's back room, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on Maya. The golden retriever lay curled around her puppies, her breathing slow but steady. The sight should have brought him relief, but instead, it stirred an anger that simmered beneath the surface. "How does something like this happen?" he muttered, half to himself, half to Claire, who was busy organizing supplies on a nearby shelf. Claire turned to him, her expression a mix of sadness and determination. "It happens because people see animals as things, not living beings. If she really came from GeneSys Labs..." She hesitated, her voice dropping. "They're not just a breeding facility. They're involved in genetic engineering, trying to create perfect animals for commercial purposes." Ethan's brow furrowed. "You're saying they were experimenting on her?" Claire nodded grimly. "There have been rumors about them for years, about dogs bred for appearances, sold for high prices, and those that don't make the cut, being discarded or worse." Ethan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. The thought of Maya and her puppies being treated as disposable churned his stomach. "So what now?" he asked. "We just patch her up and hope whoever did this doesn't come looking?" Claire gave him a pointed look. "You're not the kind of man to just let this go, are you?" Later that night, after Claire had gone home, Ethan sat in his truck outside the station, scrolling through his phone. A quick search of GeneSys Labs pulled up a polished corporate website showcasing sleek facilities and smiling animals. The tagline read, "Advancing Animal Genetics for a Better Future." Ethan scoffed. The site painted a picture of innovation and care. But after what he'd seen, he wasn't buying it. Digging deeper, he stumbled upon forum posts and local news articles accusing GeneSys Labs of unethical practices. Anonymous employees claimed the company destroyed defective animals and hid evidence of abuse. The more Ethan read, the angrier he became. These weren't just rumors, they were warnings. And yet, nothing had been done to stop them. The next day, Ethan returned to Claire's station, a determined look in his eyes. "I'm going to GeneSys Labs," he said bluntly. Claire blinked, startled. Ethan, that's not a good idea. If what you've read is true, these people won't just sit back and let you walk in there. I'm not planning on walking in, Ethan replied. But I need to know more about what they're doing. If Maya and her puppies are connected to them, then this isn't over. Not by a long shot. Claire hesitated, then sighed. If you're serious about this, you'll need help. Let me come with you. Ethan shook his head. No, you've already done enough by taking care of Maya. This is my mess to deal with. It's not just your mess, Claire said firmly. If they're hurting animals, someone has to hold them accountable. And I'm not letting you go alone. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we do this carefully. No heroics. Claire smiled faintly. Deal. That evening, the two of them parked a mile away from GeneSys Labs, a sprawling facility surrounded by high fences and security cameras. They crept closer, staying hidden in the shadows. From their vantage point, they could see the main building modern, cold, and sterile under the harsh glow of floodlights. A security guard patrolled the perimeter. But the real challenge was the cameras positioned at every corner. Claire pulled out a small notebook. There's no way we're getting in without being seen. But if we can find their dumpster, we might get lucky. Corporations like this tend to be sloppy with their waste. Ethan nodded, scanning the area. There, he whispered, pointing to a service gate on the far side of the property. They waited for the guard to pass, then moved quickly, sticking close to the fence. Behind the service gate was a row of industrial-sized dumpsters. Claire pulled on gloves and began rummaging through the contents, her nose wrinkling at the stench. Here, she whispered, holding up a bundle of papers. Ethan took the stack, flipping through the pages. Most were mundane inventory lists, invoices, but one document caught his eye. A log detailing subjects discarded due to genetic abnormalities. His stomach churned as he read the descriptions. Subject 14A, cranial deformity, euthanized. Subject 22C, behavioral instability, destroyed. The list went on, each entry more horrifying than the last. They're killing them, Ethan said, his voice low but trembling with fury. They're creating these dogs, and when they're not perfect, Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. We need to take this to the authorities, she said. Ethan shook his head. Not yet. If we go to the cops now, they'll bury this. We need something bigger, something they can't ignore. As they slipped back into the shadows, Ethan felt a fire ignite within him. Maya and her puppies weren't just victims, they were survivors, and he was going to make sure they got justice. The next morning, Ethan sat at a corner booth in a small diner, sipping black coffee while the log they found at GeneSys Labs lay spread out in front of him. Claire sat across from him, a laptop open as she searched for more information about the facility. We can't just sit on this, Ethan said, his voice tight. This isn't just about Maya. It's about every animal they've done this to. Claire glanced around the diner, making sure no one was paying attention before lowering her voice. I agree, but if we're going to take them down, we need more than just a few papers. We need undeniable proof, something that links them directly to these crimes. Ethan tapped the table, his jaw tightening. How do we get that without getting caught? Claire hesitated, then leaned in. There's a former employee, someone who worked there and tried to blow the whistle years ago. He disappeared from the spotlight, but I think I can track him down. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're serious? Claire nodded. If he's willing to talk, we might have what we need to expose them. By late afternoon, Claire had found a lead. The whistleblower, a man named Michael Green, was now living in a small town a few hours away. According to public records, he'd been a researcher at GeneSys Labs before abruptly resigning under suspicious circumstances. Ethan and Claire drove to the address, a modest, rundown house on the outskirts of town. The yard was overgrown, and the curtains were tightly drawn, giving the place an air of secrecy. Ethan knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He exchanged a glance with Claire before knocking again. Harder this time. "Go away!" A voice shouted from inside. "We're not here to cause trouble," Ethan called back. "We just want to talk about GeneSys Labs." There was a long pause before the door creaked open slightly, revealing a haggard man with unkempt hair and bloodshot eyes. He looked at them warily. "Who sent you?" "No one sent us," Claire said gently. "We found evidence that connects GeneSys Labs to some terrible things. We thought you might be able to help us." Michael's eyes narrowed. "They ruined my life. What makes you think I'd stick my neck out again?" "Because it's not just about you," Ethan said, his voice firm. "It's about the animals they're still hurting. We have proof, but we need more to stop them for good." Michael hesitated, his hand tightening on the doorframe. Finally, he opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, the house was cluttered but functional. Michael gestured for them to sit while he poured himself a drink. "You're not the first ones to come to me about GeneSys," he began, his voice bitter. "But no one's ever followed through. What makes you different?" Ethan leaned forward. "Because I've seen what they've done. I found a dog, Maya, and her puppies. They left her to die because she wasn't good enough for their experiments. I'm not walking away from this." Michael studied Ethan for a moment, then sighed. "All right, but you need to understand something. GeneSys isn't just a lab. They have connections, powerful ones, politicians, investors, people who'll do anything to protect their interests. We're not afraid," Claire said, though her voice wavered slightly. Michael smirked. "You should be, but if you're serious, I might have something that can help." Michael retrieved a battered briefcase from a locked cabinet and set it on the table. Inside were stacks of files, photographs, and a small USB drive. "This is everything I took with me when I left," he explained. "It's not just about the animals. GeneSys was also experimenting on people, trying to create genetic enhancements. Most of the trials failed, but they covered it up." Ethan's jaw tightened. "How is this not public knowledge? They're experts at hiding their tracks," Michael said grimly. "But if you're willing to take this to the press, it might finally bring them down." As Ethan and Claire left Michael's house, the weight of what they'd learned pressed heavily on their shoulders. The files Michael had given them were damning, but they also painted a picture of an enemy far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. Back in the truck, Ethan glanced at Claire. "Are you still in?" Claire met his gaze, her expression resolute. "I'm in, but we're going to need a plan." Ethan nodded, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Then let's make one." Back at Claire's station, Ethan and Claire laid out the evidence from Michael on the workbench in the back room. The files were overwhelming: photographs of animals in cages, notes detailing failed experiments, and financial records linking GeneSys Labs to prominent donors and politicians. "This is huge," Claire said, flipping through the documents. "If this gets out, it could bring them down." Ethan nodded but didn't look reassured. "And it'll make us targets. They won't let this slide." Claire sighed, placing a hand on the USB drive that Michael had given them. "The real question is, how do we get this into the right hands without it disappearing?" Ethan stared at the drive, his mind racing. "The press. If we give this to a journalist with a big enough platform, they can make it public before GeneSys can cover it up." Claire hesitated. "I know someone, Sarah Jenkins. She's an investigative reporter based in Denver. If anyone can handle this, it's her." "Then we go to Denver," Ethan said firmly, as they prepared for the trip. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He double-checked the locks on the station's doors and made sure Maya and her puppies were secure in their enclosure. "You think they know about us?" Claire asked, noticing his tension. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, glancing out the window. "But I'm not taking any chances." The next morning, they set off for Denver with Maya and the puppies in the back of the truck. The drive was long and uneventful at first, but as they neared the city, Ethan noticed a black SUV trailing them. "Claire," he said, his voice low, "We've got company." Claire glanced in the side mirror, her face paling. "What do we do?" Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Hang on." He abruptly turned onto a side road, the tires skidding slightly on the icy pavement. The SUV followed, speeding up as it closed the distance. The chase through the winding back roads was tense. Ethan used every ounce of his experience as a driver to stay ahead, weaving through narrow turns and snow-covered paths. "What do they want?" Claire shouted over the roar of the engine. "The files," Ethan replied. "If they catch us, they'll destroy everything." In the back seat, Maya barked fiercely, her protective instincts kicking in as the SUV drew closer. Ethan spotted an abandoned gas station up ahead and made a snap decision. "Hold on." He slammed on the brakes, skidding into the parking lot and positioning the truck behind the building for cover. He grabbed the USB drive from Claire. "You stay here," he ordered. "If they come, drive out of here with Maya and the pups. I'll handle them." "No way," Claire said, her voice shaking but firm. "We're in this together." Ethan didn't have time to argue. The SUV screeched to a stop in front of the station, and two men in black suits stepped out, their expressions cold and calculating. Ethan stepped out of the truck, the drive hidden in his pocket. "What do you want?" he called out, his voice steady despite the tension. One of the men smirked. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." Ethan squared his shoulders. "I don't think it belongs to you either." The second man pulled a gun, pointing it at Ethan. "Hand it over, or this gets messy." Before Ethan could respond, Maya's barking grew louder, and Claire stepped out of the truck, holding a tire iron in her hands. "You think you're just going to walk away?" she said, her voice trembling with anger. The men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting resistance. Ethan took the opportunity to reach into his jacket and pull out a flashlight, shining it directly into their eyes. The sudden burst of light disoriented them long enough for him to tackle the man with the gun. The struggle was brief but intense. Ethan's military training gave him the upper hand, and within moments, he had disarmed the man. The second man hesitated, realizing they were outmatched, and retreated to the SUV. "This isn't over," the first man growled as he scrambled to his feet and followed his partner. The SUV sped off, disappearing into the distance. Ethan and Claire stood in silence for a moment, catching their breath. Maya barked again, her tail wagging as if celebrating their victory. "Are you okay?" Claire asked, her voice shaky. Ethan nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Yeah, but we've got to move fast. If they found us once, they'll find us again." They climbed back into the truck, the weight of the USB drive in Ethan's pocket feeling heavier than ever. "Denver's not far," Claire said, her resolve hardening. "Let's finish this." The truck roared back onto the highway, the city of Denver looming in the distance. Ethan's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. "You think they'll follow us again?" Claire asked, her voice still trembling from the encounter. "They will," Ethan replied grimly, "but they won't make their move in the middle of a city. Too many witnesses." In the back, Maya lay protectively over her puppies, her eyes watching Ethan intently as if sensing the weight of the situation. By mid-afternoon, they arrived at Sarah Jenkins' office, a modest building tucked away in a bustling part of downtown Denver. The sign outside read Jenkins Investigative Media, and the buzz of the city was a sharp contrast to the desolate Wyoming countryside they had left behind. Ethan and Claire carried the files and the USB drive inside, leaving Maya and the puppies safely locked in the truck. Sarah, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, greeted them with a curious but cautious expression. "Claire Walker," Sarah said, shaking Claire's hand. "It's been a while." "Too long," Claire replied with a faint smile. "We need your help, Sarah, and this is Ethan Harris. He's the one who found all of this." Sarah gestured for them to sit at a cluttered desk piled high with papers and folders. "Start from the beginning," she said. "Over the next hour, Ethan and Claire recounted everything: the rescue of Maya and her puppies, the documents they found in the dumpster, and their encounter with Michael Green. Sarah listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "This is explosive," she said finally. "If what you're saying is true, this could blow GeneSys Labs wide open." "It's true," Ethan said, his tone firm. "We've got everything you need to prove it." Sarah tapped her pen against the desk. "I can publish this, but it won't be easy. GeneSys has deep pockets and powerful allies. Once this goes live, they'll come after me and after you. We're already in their sights," Claire said. "We were chased off the road on the way here." Sarah frowned. "Then we need to act fast. If they know you're in Denver, it's only a matter of time before they show up." Sarah spent the next several hours reviewing the files and the USB drive. The evidence was damning: detailed records of genetic experiments, photographs of injured animals, and financial transactions linking GeneSys to influential donors. As Sarah worked, Ethan stepped outside to check on Maya and the puppies. They were curled up together in the back of the truck. The puppies snuggled against Maya's warm fur. Ethan reached in to scratch behind Maya's ears. "We're going to get justice for you," he murmured. Maya looked up at him, her amber eyes filled with a quiet trust that made Ethan's chest tighten. Inside, Sarah called Ethan and Claire back into her office. "The files are solid," she said, "but we need more, something visual that people can't deny. If we can get video footage of their lab conditions, it'll be the nail in the coffin." Ethan exchanged a glance with Claire. "You want us to go back?" Sarah shook her head. "Not necessarily. I have a contact, a former employee who worked security at GeneSys. He might be able to help us get what we need without setting foot inside the lab." "Where do we find him?" Ethan asked. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed a number. After a brief conversation, she hung up and turned to them. "His name's Travis. He agreed to meet tonight at a diner on the edge of town." That evening, Ethan and Claire arrived at the diner, a retro-style building with neon lights that flickered in the darkness. They spotted Travis sitting in a booth at the back, his muscular frame and short-cropped hair marking him as an ex-military type. "You the ones Sarah sent?" Travis asked, his tone guarded. Ethan nodded. "We need your help." Travis leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're going after GeneSys? That's a dangerous game. I walked away from them because I didn't want any part of their crap. But going against them outright? That's a death wish." "We don't have a choice," Claire said. "They need to be stopped." Travis studied them for a moment, then sighed. "I still have access to some of their systems. If you're serious about this, I can get you into their live security feeds. But it won't be cheap." Ethan frowned. "We're not doing this for money." Travis smirked. "Good thing I am." After a tense negotiation, they agreed on a payment and a plan. Travis would give them access to the feeds, allowing Sarah to record footage of the lab conditions remotely. "You'd better know what you're doing," Travis said as they left. "Because once this goes live, GeneSys won't just come after you. They'll come after everyone you care about." Back at Sarah's office, they set up the connection. As the live feed flickered to life, Ethan felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The images on the screen were worse than they had imagined. Rows of dogs confined to small cages, their bodies scarred and malnourished. One dog whimpered as a lab technician injected it with an unknown substance. Claire covered her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. "This is inhumane." Sarah hit the record button. "Let's make sure the world sees it." The live feed captured everything: dogs confined in sterile, soulless cages, their desperate eyes pleading for help. Some whined softly, while others lay still, too weak to move. Technicians moved between the rows of cages, their actions mechanical as they performed procedures on the animals. Ethan's jaw tightened as he watched one technician roughly handle a small beagle, injecting it with a vial of glowing green liquid. The dog whimpered and collapsed. his tiny body trembling uncontrollably. "This is torture," Claire said, her voice shaking with anger. Sarah leaned forward, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she recorded the footage. "This is exactly what we need. No one will be able to look at this and pretend it's okay." But as the feed continued, a new figure entered the frame, a man in a crisp lab coat, his sharp features instantly commanding attention. "That's him," Claire whispered. "Dr. Nathan Cross," Sarah confirmed. "The mastermind behind all of this." The camera followed Dr. Cross as he inspected the cages. Speaking with a technician, the audio was muffled, but his body language radiated authority. He gestured toward one of the larger dogs, a German shepherd with patches of fur missing and scars running along its sides. "What's he saying?" Ethan asked. Sarah adjusted the audio, straining to pick up fragments of the conversation. "Terminate, failed subject." Dr. Cross's voice came through faintly, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. "They're going to kill it," Claire said, horrified. "We can't let that happen," Ethan said, his fists clenching. Sarah glanced at him. "This is happening in real time. If you're thinking of going back there." Ethan stood abruptly, his expression resolute. "I have to." Within minutes, Ethan and Claire were back in the truck, speeding toward GeneSys Labs. Maya and her puppies stirred in the back, sensing the tension in the air. "Are you sure about this?" Claire asked, her voice tight with worry. "We barely got out last time." Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "We have no choice. If we wait, that dog will be dead. And God knows how many others will follow." Claire nodded, her fear giving way to determination. "Then we do it together." They parked a few blocks away from the lab, using the cover of darkness to approach the facility. Travis had sent them the guard schedule, and they timed their movements carefully, slipping past the perimeter undetected. The dumpster area where they had first found the files now seemed like a distant memory. This time, they were heading straight for the main building. Ethan found an unlocked maintenance door and pushed it open, the cold metal creaking softly. Inside, the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, mixing with the faint whimpers and barks of the dogs. "We need to find that German shepherd," Ethan whispered, motioning for Claire to follow. Navigating the dimly lit corridors, they avoided the patrolling guards and security cameras. Thanks to the live feed Sarah was monitoring remotely. Over their earpiece, Sarah's voice crackled softly. "Left at the next hallway," she instructed. "The dog is in the far row of cages." They reached the lab, and the sight stopped them in their tracks. Rows of cages lined the walls, each one housing a dog in various stages of suffering. The air was thick with the scent of fear and despair. Ethan spotted the German shepherd, its body pressed against the back of the cage. Its breathing was shallow, and its eyes were dull, but it perked up slightly at the sight of them. "Hang on, buddy," Ethan murmured, kneeling in front of the cage. He worked quickly to pick the lock, his hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. Claire stood watch, her eyes darting toward the door. "Hurry, Ethan. We don't have much time." The lock clicked open, and the shepherd hesitated for a moment before stumbling out. Ethan gently scooped it up, feeling the animal's ribs beneath its matted fur. "Got him," Ethan said, his voice soft but triumphant. But their relief was short-lived. Alarms suddenly blared, the harsh red glow of emergency lights flooding the room. "They know you're there." Sarah's voice came through the earpiece. "You've got guards heading your way. Get out now." Ethan and Claire moved quickly, the German shepherd cradled in Ethan's arms. They ducked into a side corridor as footsteps thundered down the main hall. "This way," Claire whispered, leading him toward an emergency exit. As they burst through the door into the cold night air, Ethan spotted a group of guards converging near the truck. "We can't get to the truck," Ethan said, his mind racing. "Over here." Claire motioned toward a row of supply vans parked near the loading dock. They climbed into one of the vans. Ethan gently laying the shepherd down in the back while Claire hotwired the vehicle. The engine roared to life just as the guards spotted them. "Go!" Ethan shouted. The van sped out of the lot, bullets pinging off the rear bumper as they disappeared into the night. Ethan glanced back at the shepherd, who looked up at him with tired but grateful eyes. "You're safe now," he said softly. Claire gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles white. "That was too close." "We're not done yet," Ethan replied, determination burning in his eyes. The van sped through the darkened streets, its headlights cutting through the quiet of the night. Ethan sat in the back, cradling the injured German shepherd as Claire navigated the unfamiliar roads. The dog's labored breathing filled the silence, each wheeze a painful reminder of the cruelty it had endured. "We can't go back to Sarah's office," Claire said, glancing at Ethan in the rearview mirror. "It's too risky. They'll be looking for us there." "Head for the outskirts," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the chaos. "There's an old barn off Route 47. We can lay low there for now." Claire nodded, gripping the wheel tighter as they turned onto a side road. The van bumped along the uneven path, the city lights fading into the distance. As they arrived at the barn, the moon cast an eerie glow over the dilapidated structure. Ethan and Claire worked quickly to secure the space, barricading the doors and setting up makeshift bedding for the dogs. The German shepherd, now lying on a pile of blankets, whimpered softly as Ethan examined its injuries. "He's in bad shape," Claire said, kneeling beside him. "We need to get fluids into him, and fast." Ethan nodded, his expression grim. "We'll do what we can here. He just needs to hold on a little longer." Maya, sensing the shepherd's distress, approached cautiously. She nuzzled the injured dog gently, her maternal instincts taking over as her puppies huddled nearby. Ethan watched the interaction, a flicker of hope breaking through his exhaustion. "She's incredible," he murmured. "She's a fighter," Claire agreed. As the night wore on, Ethan and Claire took turns keeping watch. The barn creaked and groaned in the wind, each sound setting their nerves on edge. Ethan sat by the window, scanning the empty fields with a pair of old binoculars. "They'll come looking," he said quietly, more to himself than to Claire. "They won't let this go." Claire, sitting nearby with a thermos of coffee, nodded. "We've got the footage. We've got the files. They know we can destroy them." Ethan turned to her, his eyes hard. "Then we make sure they don't get the chance." In the early hours of the morning, a low rumble echoed in the distance. Ethan stiffened, his instincts honed from years in the military kicking in. "Claire," he said sharply, pointing toward the horizon. A convoy of black SUVs emerged, their headlights piercing the pre-dawn darkness. "They found us," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan grabbed his bag, pulling out a flare gun and a small pistol he had kept hidden in the truck. "Get the dogs into the back room, barricade the door and stay with them." "What about you?" Claire asked, her voice thick with fear. "I'll hold them off as long as I can," Ethan replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. As Claire gathered the dogs, Ethan moved to the entrance of the barn. The SUVs came to a halt, and a dozen men in dark tactical gear poured out, their movements calculated and efficient. One of them stepped forward, a tall figure with a commanding presence. His voice carried through the cold morning air. "Ethan Harris, you have something that belongs to us. Hand it over, and no one gets hurt." Ethan stepped into the light, his pistol raised. "You're not getting anything. Leave now, or this ends badly for you." The man smirked, brave, but stupid. The tension was palpable as Ethan stood his ground, his pistol trained on the group of armed men. The leader of the convoy, unshaken, raised his hand in a casual gesture. "Take him," the man ordered, his voice cold. Two men broke from the group, moving toward Ethan with military precision. Ethan didn't wait. He fired a warning shot into the air, the sharp crack echoing through the quiet morning. "Next one won't miss," Ethan growled, his eyes locked on the advancing men. They hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances, but their leader's barked command pushed them forward. As the men rushed him, Ethan ducked behind the barn's outer wall, using the structure for cover. The first man rounded the corner, only to be met with a well-placed punch to the jaw. He crumpled to the ground as the second man lunged forward, tackling Ethan. The two grappled in the dirt, the man's superior size giving him an advantage. But Ethan's experience and determination outweighed brute strength. He twisted free, landing a solid elbow to the man's ribs before shoving him into the side of the barn. Before Ethan could catch his breath, gunfire erupted from the SUVs. Bullets thudded into the barn's walls, sending splinters flying. Ethan scrambled back inside, slamming the door shut behind him. Inside, Claire was crouched in the back room with the dogs, her face pale but resolute. Maya growled softly, her body positioned protectively in front of her puppies and the injured shepherd. "They're not backing down," Ethan said, locking the door and bracing it with a heavy wooden beam. "What do we do?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. Ethan glanced at the flare gun in his hand, an idea forming. "We're not going to outfight them, but we can outthink them." He quickly explained his plan. Claire would stay with the dogs, keeping them quiet and safe, while he created a distraction to buy them time. "I'll lure them away from the barn," Ethan said. "When I give the signal, you take the dogs and head for the woods. There's a creek about half a mile east. Follow it, it'll mask your tracks." Claire's eyes widened. "You can't face them alone." "I don't plan to," Ethan replied. "I just need to keep them busy long enough for you to get clear." With a deep breath, Ethan moved to the side window and fired the flare into the sky. The red light arced through the air, its glow cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. "That'll get their attention," he muttered. Sure enough, the armed men paused their assault, their leader barking orders as they redirected their focus toward the flare. Ethan slipped out the back of the barn, sticking to the shadows as he made his way toward the nearby tree line. From his new vantage point, Ethan spotted the men regrouping near the barn. He picked up a rock and hurled it at one of the SUVs, the loud clang drawing their attention. "Over here, you cowards!" Ethan shouted, his voice echoing through the open field. The men turned, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they moved toward him. Inside the barn, Claire gathered the dogs, whispering soothing words to keep them calm. Maya seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Her ears perked as she watched Claire's every move. When the sound of footsteps faded, Claire pushed open the back door and motioned for Maya and the puppies to follow. "Come on," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Let's go." They slipped into the woods, the dogs moving surprisingly quietly as they followed Claire's lead. The air was crisp and still, each crack of a branch underfoot making her heart race. Claire's grip tightened on the shepherd's makeshift leash, her resolve strengthening with every step. "We're going to make it," she whispered, more to herself than to the dogs. Meanwhile, Ethan led the armed men deeper into the fields, using the terrain to stay one step ahead. His military training allowed him to move swiftly and silently, keeping his pursuers guessing. But he knew his time was running out. As he ducked behind a large boulder, Ethan pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to Sarah. "Send help to Route 47. Barn's compromised. Claire's heading east with the dogs." He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever came next. Ethan crouched behind the boulder, his breath visible in the icy morning air. The sound of boots crunching through the snow grew louder as the men closed in. He could hear their leader barking orders, their voices tense but focused. "He's close," one of the men muttered. "Spread out. He can't have gone far." Ethan scanned the area, searching for his next move. He spotted an old irrigation ditch a few yards away, partially hidden by overgrown brush. It was shallow but might offer enough cover to slip past the men. "Time to move," he muttered to himself, with practiced precision. Ethan darted from the boulder toward the ditch, keeping his movements low and silent. The men, distracted by their search, didn't notice as he slipped through the brush and disappeared into the shadows. Once inside the ditch, Ethan paused to reassess. He pulled out his phone and checked for a response from Sarah. A single message flashed on the screen. "Help's on the way. Hold tight." Not much of a choice, Ethan murmured. Pocketing the phone, he glanced back toward the barn, now barely visible in the distance. The men were still combing the area, their flashlights sweeping across the field. Ethan's heart pounded as he calculated his next step. Meanwhile, Claire pushed forward through the dense woods. The dogs closed behind her. The injured shepherd stumbled slightly, but Maya nudged him forward, her quiet strength inspiring the group to keep moving. Claire's legs burned with the effort, but she didn't stop. The creek Ethan had mentioned was just ahead, its frozen surface shimmering faintly in the dim light. "We're almost there," she whispered, her voice trembling with both exhaustion and determination. She knelt beside the creek, adjusting the makeshift leashes and checking on the puppies. They were shivering but safe, their small bodies huddled together for warmth. Maya licked Claire's hand, as if to reassure her. "You're a good girl," Claire said softly, stroking Maya's fur. "We're going to get through this." Back in the field, Ethan continued to evade his pursuers, using the terrain to his advantage, but his luck ran out when one of the men stumbled upon the ditch, his flashlight catching a glimpse of movement. "There!" the man shouted. Ethan cursed under his breath, breaking into a sprint as bullets whizzed past him. He zigzagged through the snow, his boots kicking up powder with every step. The men gave chase, their shouts growing louder. Ethan spotted an old storage shed in the distance and made a beeline for it. He threw open the door and slammed it shut behind him, quickly barricading it with a rusted metal shelf. The shed was dark and cramped, filled with old farming tools and debris. Ethan crouched behind a stack of crates, his pistol drawn as he listened to the men outside. "He's in there," one of them said. "Flush him out." Ethan's grip tightened on the pistol. His mind raced as he prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the air, their wailing echoing across the open fields. The men outside hesitated, their movements faltering. "Cops are coming," one of them said, his voice panicked. The leader's voice cut through the chaos. "Fall back. We can't afford to get caught here." Ethan peered through a crack in the shed's wall, watching as the men retreated to their SUVs. The vehicles roared to life and sped off, disappearing into the distance just as the flashing lights of police cruisers appeared on the horizon. Ethan stepped out of the shed, his body sagging with relief as the police arrived. An officer approached him, her hand on her holstered weapon. "Ethan Harris?" she asked. "That's me," Ethan replied, lowering his pistol. "We got a call from Sarah Jenkins," the officer said. "She told us what's going on. Are you all right?" Ethan nodded, though exhaustion was etched into his face. "I'm fine, but my partner's in the woods with the dogs. They need help." The officer signaled to her team. "We'll find them. Hang tight." Claire, now resting by the creek, heard the sirens in the distance. She stood, her heart racing as the flashing lights appeared through the trees. "It's okay," she whispered to the dogs. "We're safe now." Maya barked softly, her tail wagging as the officers approached. "Claire Walker?" one of them asked. "Yes," Claire replied, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank God you're here." The officers helped Claire and the dogs into their vehicles, wrapping them in warm blankets. As they drove back toward the barn, Claire leaned against Maya, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. Ethan was waiting when they arrived, his face lighting up with relief as he saw Claire step out of the vehicle. "You made it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Claire smiled weakly. "We all did." The barn was now a hive of activity. Police officers and animal control agents swarmed the area, securing the site and gathering statements from Ethan and Claire. The injured German shepherd, along with Maya and her puppies, was loaded into a van bound for a nearby veterinary clinic. Ethan stood to the side, watching as the officers worked. His body ached, and exhaustion pulled at him, but his mind was still racing. Claire approached, her expression a mix of relief and lingering concern. "They said the dogs are going to be okay," she said, her voice soft. "They'll get the care they need." Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the SUVs had disappeared. "What about GeneSys? Those men won't stop. They'll just regroup and come back stronger." Claire placed a hand on his arm. "We've done everything we can for now. Sarah has the footage, and the police have the evidence. It's in their hands now." Later that day, back at Sarah Jenkins' office, the mood was tense but hopeful. Sarah sat at her desk, editing the footage they had captured. The video now combined the live feed of the lab conditions, Ethan and Claire's testimonies, and files from Michael Green. "This will go live tonight," Sarah said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "By morning, everyone will know the truth." Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "What happens then?" Sarah looked up, her expression serious. "There'll be outrage, public pressure. GeneSys won't be able to hide from this, but it's not going to be a quick fight." "It never is," Ethan said with a sigh. That night, the video went live on Sarah's investigative channel, shared across social media and news outlets. The footage was raw and powerful, showcasing the cruelty and inhumanity of GeneSys Labs. It included images of the injured dogs, interviews with Claire and Ethan, and a voiceover detailing the company's crimes. The response was immediate. Thousands of comments flooded in, expressing anger, shock, and demands for justice. Hashtags like #ShutdownGeneSys and #JusticeForTheDogs trended within hours. Ethan watched from Claire's station as the views climbed into the millions. Maya lay beside him, her head resting on his knee, while the puppies slept soundly in a pile of blankets. "You did it," Claire said, sitting next to him. "We all did," Ethan replied. In the days that followed, GeneSys Labs faced mounting pressure. Federal investigators opened a case against the company, and its leadership scrambled to control the narrative. Dr. Nathan Cross, the man behind the experiments, was placed under investigation, his whereabouts unknown. Michael Green, the former whistleblower, came forward publicly, his testimony adding further weight to the evidence. For Ethan, life began to settle into a new normal. Maya and her puppies stayed with him at Claire's station while they recovered, and the bond between them grew stronger every day. One afternoon, as Ethan played with the puppies in the yard, Claire approached him with a warm smile. "The shelter found homes for the puppies," she said. "Loving families, all of them." Ethan paused, his hand resting on Maya's head. "What about her?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "That's up to you." Ethan looked down at Maya, who gazed back at him with unwavering trust. "I think she's already found her home," he said with a smile. As the weeks turned into months, GeneSys Labs was officially shut down, its assets seized, and its leadership charged with multiple crimes. The footage from Sarah's channel became a landmark case for animal rights, inspiring reforms and new legislation. For Ethan, the experience had been transformative. The man who once lived in solitude now found himself part of a family, one built not by blood, but by loyalty, trust, and second chances. One crisp morning, Ethan loaded Maya into his truck for a delivery run. The road stretched out before them, the horizon glowing with the promise of a new day. "You ready, girl?" Ethan asked, scratching behind her ears. Maya barked softly, her tail wagging as they drove off into the distance, leaving the scars of the past behind. The first rays of dawn broke through the horizon, painting the Wyoming countryside in hues of orange and gold. Ethan stood on the porch of Claire's station, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Beside him, Maya sat patiently, her tail sweeping softly against the wooden boards. The events of the past week still lingered in his mind. The chaos at the barn, the tense escape, and the relief when the police arrived. Now, with the immediate threat behind them. A sense of calm had begun to settle. "You're up early," Claire said, stepping out onto the porch. "Old habits," Ethan replied, smiling faintly. "Couldn't sleep." Claire nodded, sipping her own coffee. "You've been through a lot. It's going to take time to feel normal again." Ethan looked out at the open fields, the quiet broken only by the occasional chirp of a bird. "I'm not sure normal is something I'm looking for anymore." As the day unfolded, the aftermath of their efforts became clearer. Sarah Jenkins' exposé had gone viral, sparking outrage and calls for accountability. News vans parked outside GeneSys Labs as reporters sought to uncover every detail of the company's crimes. Claire scrolled through her phone, reading the flood of comments beneath Sarah's video. "People are furious," she said, glancing at Ethan. "They're demanding justice. It's all over the news." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good. Maybe now things will start to change." Later that morning, the phone in Claire's station rang. It was Sarah. "Ethan, Claire, you need to see this," Sarah said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "They just raided Dr. Cross's private estate. They found more files, more evidence. It's over for him." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "What about the animals?" "They rescued several dogs from his estate," Sarah replied. "It's going to take time, but they're safe now, and thanks to your footage. They can't sweep this under the rug." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." "It's not just me," Sarah said. "None of this would have been possible without you too. You didn't just save those dogs, you made people care." As the weeks passed, the puppies found new homes with loving families. Maya, however, remained by Ethan's side. Their bond had grown unbreakable, her loyalty a constant reminder of the good that could come from even the darkest situations. One afternoon, Ethan received a visit from a young couple who had adopted one of Maya's puppies. The little dog bounded into the station, tail wagging furiously as it greeted Ethan and Maya. "He's doing great," the woman said, smiling warmly. "We can't thank you enough." Ethan crouched down, scratching the puppy behind the ears. "You're the ones giving him a good life," he said. "That's all we ever wanted." Later that night, as Ethan sat by the fire pit behind the station, he reflected on how much his life had changed. The man who once kept to himself now found purpose in the connections he had forged, not just with the dogs, but with people like Claire and Sarah. Maya lay at his feet, her head resting on his boot. Ethan reached down, gently stroking her fur. "We did good, girl," he murmured. "We did real good." The weeks rolled into months, and the impact of Ethan and Claire's efforts spread far beyond Wyoming. Sarah's exposé had become a rallying cry for animal rights activists and whistleblowers across the country. Petitions to strengthen laws against animal cruelty gained millions of signatures, while protests outside GeneSys Labs and its associated investors intensified. Claire showed Ethan an article on her phone one morning. "Look at this," she said, handing it to him. The headline read, "Former GeneSys Labs CEO faces federal charges as nationwide investigation unfolds." Beneath it was a photograph of Dr. Nathan Cross being escorted out of a courthouse in handcuffs. Ethan scanned the article, his lips pressing into a thin line. "It's a start," he said quietly. "It's more than that," Claire replied. "This is accountability. People are finally paying attention." One afternoon, Ethan decided to visit the families who had adopted Maya's puppies. He wanted to see how they were doing and check on the little lives he had helped save. The first stop was the home of a single mother and her young daughter, who had adopted the smallest puppy, a curious little golden ball of energy named Max. When Ethan arrived, Max bounded out to greet him, his tail wagging furiously. The young girl ran after him, giggling as the puppy darted around her. "Max has been amazing," the mother said, smiling warmly. "He's brought so much joy to our lives. My daughter finally has a best friend." Ethan crouched to pat Max, who licked his hand enthusiastically. "Looks like he's in good hands," he said, his heart swelling with pride. The next stop was the home of an elderly man who had adopted another puppy, Scout. The man had lost his wife years ago and lived alone, but Scout had brought new energy into his life. "Scout keeps me on my toes," the man said with a chuckle as the puppy playfully tugged at his shoelaces. "He's the best company I could ask for." Ethan nodded, watching as the man threw a tennis ball for Scout, who chased it with boundless enthusiasm. "You've given him a great home," Ethan said. "You gave him a second chance," the man replied, his voice filled with gratitude. As Ethan drove back to Claire's station, Maya sat beside him in the passenger seat, her head resting on his arm. The visits had reaffirmed something Ethan had struggled to admit to himself, that his actions had mattered. "We did good, Maya," he said softly, glancing at her. "They're happy, and they're safe. That's all that matters." Maya wagged her tail, as if in agreement. That evening, Ethan and Claire sat together by the fire pit, sharing a quiet moment. The stars above were bright, their light reflecting in the stillness of the night. "You ever think about what's next?" Claire asked, breaking the silence. Ethan shrugged. "I've been on the road for so long. I never really thought about staying in one place. But now," he trailed off, looking at Maya. Claire smiled. "You've got roots now. Maybe it's time to build something." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe it is." The following days saw Ethan embracing a life he hadn't considered before. A life rooted in stability and connection. The open road, once his sanctuary, had begun to lose its allure. Instead, he found himself drawn to the simple routines of the station, caring for Maya, helping Claire with the odd jobs around the property, and planning his next steps. One morning, Claire approached Ethan with a thoughtful look. "You've been fixing things around here so much. I should start paying you rent," she teased. Ethan chuckled, wiping grease from his hands after repairing a broken gate. "I think we're even, considering you saved my life a couple of times." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. "I've been thinking, Ethan, the station could use someone like you, a partner. Someone who knows how to take care of things and isn't afraid to step up when it matters." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "Are you saying?" Claire shrugged, but there was a warmth in her eyes. "I'm saying you don't have to go back to being a lone wolf. You could stay, build something here." Ethan looked at Maya, who was sprawled in the sun, content and peaceful. He thought about the families he had visited, the lives that had been changed because of what they'd done. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. As the decision took root in Ethan's mind, new opportunities began to unfold. Local residents, inspired by the story of Maya and her puppies, started reaching out to Claire and Ethan for help with stray animals and rescues. One day, a young couple arrived at the station with a frightened stray they had found wandering near the highway. The dog, a small terrier mix, cowered in the corner, its ribs visible beneath its thin coat. Ethan knelt down, speaking softly as he extended a hand. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay. You're safe now." The dog hesitated but eventually inched forward, sniffing Ethan's hand before allowing him to pick it up. Claire watched with a smile. "You've got away with them, you know." Ethan nodded, cradling the dog gently. "Maybe it's because I know what it's like to feel lost." Word spread quickly, and before long, the station became an unofficial rescue hub. People brought in strays, injured animals, and even supplies to support the growing operation. Ethan and Claire worked tirelessly, with Maya often acting as a calming presence for the new arrivals. One evening, as they reviewed a list of upcoming rescue efforts, Claire looked up at Ethan. "You know, we could make this official, a proper rescue center. We'd need permits and funding, but with the community behind us." Ethan leaned back in his chair, a smile tugging at his lips. "A rescue center? Huh? Never thought I'd end up running something like that." "Life's funny that way," Claire said with a grin. Ethan glanced at Maya, who was curled up by the fireplace. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it." That decision marked a turning point, not just for Ethan and Claire, but for the entire community. Volunteers stepped forward to help with construction. Donations poured in, and the station transformed into a beacon of hope for animals in need. Through it all, Ethan found a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known was possible. The man who once lived for the solitude of the open road had discovered a purpose greater than himself. Months passed, and the station officially reopened as the Haven Rescue Center, complete with new kennels, a treatment room, and an adoption area. The transformation was remarkable, and the community's involvement made it all the more meaningful. On opening day, families and volunteers gathered to celebrate the center's launch. Ethan stood by the entrance, watching as children played with some of the rescues, their laughter filling the air. Maya stood proudly by his side, her golden fur gleaming in the sunlight. Claire approached, holding a clipboard. "You ready for the big speech?" Ethan groaned playfully. "Do I have to? Public speaking isn't exactly my thing." Claire smirked. "Just be honest. People are here because they believe in what we're doing." Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped onto the small stage set up near the adoption area. The crowd quieted as he began to speak. "Thank you all for being here today," Ethan said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "When I first found Maya and her puppies, I didn't know what I was getting into. I just knew they needed help. But what started as one rescue turned into something much bigger, something I couldn't have done alone." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This center isn't just about saving animals. It's about second chances for them. And for people like me, Maya gave me a reason to fight, to care, and to believe in something again. And now, together, we can give that same chance to so many others." The crowd erupted into applause, and Ethan stepped down, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Over the next few weeks, the rescue center flourished. Strays found loving homes, injured animals recovered under Claire's care, and Ethan became a familiar face in the community. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan sat outside the center, Maya lying at his feet. Claire joined him, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," Claire said, handing him a mug. Ethan nodded, gazing out at the fields that stretched beyond the center. "Yeah, feels good, though, like we're doing something that matters." Claire smiled. "We are." For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, the chirping of crickets and the rustle of the wind their only companions. As night fell, Ethan looked down at Maya, who was dozing peacefully beside him. He reached out to scratch behind her ears, a smile tugging at his lips. "Hey, girl," he murmured. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Maya's tail thumped softly against the ground, her eyes opening briefly to meet his. In that moment, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for Maya, but for the journey that had brought him here. The open road had once been his escape, but now he had found something far more meaningful: a home, purpose, and a family he had never expected. The stars above twinkled brightly, as if to affirm that, at long last, Ethan was exactly where he was meant to be.